Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Dr. Gary Wolfram, professor of political economy at Hillsdale College in Michigan. We've asked him to comment on the economic challenges facing the nation as more than 16 million people have lost their jobs in just the past 3 weeks. So what will our economy look like at the end of this month, where we're at least scheduled to go through with our ongoing restrictions, or even longer from now, as some are advocating for? Can we afford another 12 to 18 months of social distancing? And what would do the most to reinvigorate the economy once things do reopen? So a lot to discuss today. And Dr. Wolfram, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I should point out that I'm a Hillsdale grad and had Dr. Wolfram in class. I highly recommend him and the school. Dr. Wolfram, let's first of all get your reaction to another week, not month, week of 6.6 million first-time jobless claims. It was the exact same number last week. It was 3.3 million the week before. So basic math shows us that that's more than 16 million in less than a month. What's your take on where our economy stands right now?
Well, first of all, those numbers probably are an underestimate, as you may know that a number of the states have been swamped with unemployment claims and haven't been able to process them.
Right.
But it's also more like a Hurricane Katrina event. You know, if you shut down a big chunk of the economy, you're in a brief period of time, you're going to get lots and lots of unemployment. But I don't look at it as a great measure of where the underlying economy is and how fast we'll turn around. This is more to me like a Hurricane Katrina rather than a Great Depression. But there will be some interesting things to think about, like are all these small businesses, small restaurants and bars and the like, are they going to be able to reopen? Are they going to make it through? But it's really a cash flow problem. And so I think that what the federal government did in the $2.3 trillion package was the right thing to do. Was that a perfect solution? Well, like the Rolling Stones say, you can't always get what you want, but if you try hard enough, sometimes you can get what you need. But also, I think what was huge today was the Fed's announcement of $2.3 trillion in backstop lending, where they'll be buying debt from the banks lending to businesses with less than 10,000 employees. But the banks will still keep 5% of the loans, so they'll have stake in the game. It also is addressing some of the issues that people haven't talked a lot about, but state and local governments have a huge problem here, because if you're the state of Nevada, there's a whole lot of your revenue coming in that's gaming revenue, and that's not going to be there. But I do see it as, looking at the numbers in terms of the virus, that we're looking at maybe the economy starting to reopen in another couple of weeks.
Well, I certainly hope that that's the case, and a lot of other people do too. Of course, you've got the health experts saying we seem to be starting to flatten the curve here, and the last thing we want to do is reopen too soon, because then we'll get another spike, and then we're potentially right back where we were. There are a lot of folks hoping that we're back in business at least by the beginning of May or sometime shortly thereafter. You got other folks saying, look, there's no vaccine, there's no proven treatment that works for everyone, and those sorts of clinical trials take 12 to 18 months. So here's Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, one of the architects of Obamacare, talking about what the reality is facing this country.
Realistically, COVID-19 will be here for the next 18 months or more. We will not be able to return to normalcy until we find a vaccine or effective medications. I know that's dreadful news to hear. How are people supposed to find work if this goes on in some form for a year and a half? Is all that economic pain worth trying to stop COVID-19? The truth is, we have no choice. If we prematurely end that physical distancing and the other measures, keeping it at bay, deaths could skyrocket into the hundreds of thousands, if not a million. We cannot return to normal until there's a vaccine. Conferences, concerts, sporting events, religious services, dinner in a restaurant, none of that will resume until we find a vaccine, a treatment, or a cure.
You and I are hoping, and a lot of people hoping, obviously, we can get the economy safely up and running as soon as possible. He's saying social distancing, no church, no restaurants, no concerts, no large gatherings, sporting events, whatever. until this vaccine is done, and that's going to take a year or more. What's your reaction to that?
Well, you can't shut the economy down for a year. In fact, people don't remember, but over 650,000 people died in the flu pandemic of 1918, 1919. And that was in the United States with a much smaller population. It is a major loss whenever someone dies of this. But realistically, you make trade-offs every day in terms of, do I decide to, let's say pre-pandemic, do I decide to drive to the grocery store? There's some probability that you might get in an accident and be severely injured, but we make those choices all the time. And the federal government makes these choices all the time when they're deciding how much does the FDA want to require of people when they're in their food supply, and whether we want to clean up a solid waste site. Realistically, you can't just shut the economy down. And it turns out that there would be all sorts of health effects from doing that. We know that when people lose their job, they become depressed. They wouldn't have assets to get good health care, all sorts of things. So what really needs to happen is testing. And of course, the market is out there working hard to try to produce tests they're quicker, and if we can have it so that we can waive some of the FDA regulations on testing and antibiotics and things like that we could certainly open up much more quickly. As we pointed out, some places, New York City obviously has a lot more cases than any place else. So whether New York City would open up as fast as Menominee, Michigan, that's probably not going to happen. But nonetheless, we can't keep the economy shut down for a lengthy period of time. And I don't see the economy being shut down at the order of what it is right now beyond much beyond May 1st. And I think the economy is going to be recovering by the end of the third quarter.
Well, that's certainly optimistic forecasting there. And the president is apparently, at least from the reports we're seeing today, planning to have longtime economist Art Laffer lead the way towards an economic strategy to bring us out of this. You've also got the Fed chairman saying that he thinks whenever we can restart the economy, it's going to be a pretty robust and pretty strong recovery, like you just said. Art Laffer is already talking about things like payroll tax holidays, taxing nonprofits, cutting the pay of public officials, and I'm sorry to say professors. And so, but maybe those are public funded professors, which Hillsdale would not fall into that category. What do you make of those ideas, and what do you specifically think would do the most good?
Well, some of those ideas are good, and I happen to know Art, and I think he's a really fine economist. But I think that right now we don't have to worry as much about deficits. We had a $24 trillion debt going into the situation, so we're adding a couple trillion. But we could sell 30-year bonds. I've talked to people about this in the last quite a while. 30-year Treasury bonds are selling at 1.5% or so. We could sell Treasury bonds, spread this out over 30 years, and realize this is a one-time event. And if you really want to deal with the federal debt, you have to deal with Social Security and Medicare. If you only passed one appropriations bill, and that would be for defense, and you paid interest on the national debt, you would still end up with a $300 or $400 billion a year annual budget deficit. If you just look at the numbers, where your money is spent by your federal government, you have to address Social Security and Medicare. And of course, this probably isn't the politically opportune time to start talking about how you're going to address that. But I'm not worried about an additional 2.3 trillion. I'm more worried about long term the 100 trillion in unfunded liabilities we've got with Social Security and Medicare.
Dr. Wolfram, that brings us back a little bit to what you were saying earlier. You liked the Fed action. You liked, for the most part, what was in the economic relief bill passed by Congress. You're definitely a free market guy, and so a lot of government action is not necessarily what you're known for advocating, but obviously certain circumstances might require certain actions. So for anyone who's wondering and suggesting that this is proof positive that we need a strong central government. What do you tell them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wrote a capitalist manifesto, and I've been a professor for over 30 years at Hillsdale College. So, yeah, I'm not a big government person. But what we have here is is an event like a war or a catastrophe that you have to deal with, and that's what government's for. It is a short-term phenomenon, and so we need to just go ahead, deal with it, get us through. And these businesses that are closing are not closing because they overexpanded or they're producing the wrong product, but rather they're being forced to shut down by government action. So government action is necessary to sustain them over the short term in this cash flow situation.
Dr. Wolfram, a lot to keep watching. I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. Thanks very much for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
You bet. Dr. Gary Wolfram teaches political economy at Hillsdale College in Michigan. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.